And I know that there are some things that are very annoying to him. For instance, I know that he particularly hates loud music. He hates that. And so just to annoy him, I get out in the evening and crank up the radio just as loud as I can get it, because I'm just trying to get on his nerves. He hates that. I know he hates that. And I'm just trying to get at him with my loud music. You know what you would say if I told you that as a true story? You'd say, man, you are a bad person. You're just a bad person. Setting out to personally annoy someone like that, you're a bad guy, and you'd be right. Instead, what I ought to do, if this neighbor and I don't have a good relationship, instead of doing something I know he hates, what I ought to do is something that would hopefully win him over, make a friend out of one that I haven't gotten along with in the past. A right-thinking person would do that instead of setting out to annoy someone by doing things that you know they hate. I want you to apply that logic to God. I definitely don't want to antagonize God. I want to be on God's good side. And that being the case, logic just simply says that I should avoid doing things that I know he hates. I shouldn't do things that my annoying neighbor hates. I definitely shouldn't do things that I know God hates. And so we continue our series of studies from Proverbs chapter 6 and the text that James read for us just a few moments ago. I hope that this is beginning to sort of almost come to us by memory. We're going over this again and again as we go through this series of 7 things that God hates. Proverbs 6, beginning verse 16. These 6 things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are abomination unto him. A proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. In our series, we've talked about the proud look, we've talked about the lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. Last week, we talked about a heart that devises wicked imaginations. Tonight, our study will be about feet that be swift in running to mischief. We stop here for just a minute to add words of welcome to those that are already been mentioned. We're glad that you are here. And we've had a beautiful day and a great opportunity to end the day with another period of worship and Bible study. And we're glad that you're here, be a part of it. For any and all who are visiting with us tonight, thanks for coming our way. We hope you'll come again, and we're always open to your questions. I think this is really an important text, and maybe it might be fruitful for you to print it out and stick it on the refrigerator door so that not only as we repeat it here over a 7-week series, you'll also be viewing it day by day at home. And hopefully by the time we get done with this, we'll have this committed to memory. And more than committing it to memory, we'll have some understanding of the actual points and what they mean. All right, so let's attack this one. I think this one's a pretty easy one, but certainly deserves application. God hates it when there are feet that be swift in running to mischief. Let's talk first about the word feet. I don't think he's talking about our literal feet here. I think he's talking about using a sort of a figure of speech that's descriptive of one's course of action, the direction that he is heading spiritually. I think that's the idea of feet and what he has in mind. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 26 beginning, ponder the path of thy feet. Let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand or to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. Notice, in this text, it mentions feet and foot again. But again, I don't think it's meaning your literal appendage. I think it's talking about your direction. Where are you going spiritually? You ever been on a hike? And maybe particularly on a hike up in the mountains where the trail was pretty rough. And there were rocks and tree roots, and it was not just a well-established pathway, but actually a pretty rugged backcountry trail, and you're hiking. I know many of you have done that as I have. And when you're hiking in a place like that, you have to be very careful with your feet. You've got to be careful where you place your feet. You don't want to fall. You don't want to twist an ankle. You don't want to get hurt or get into a dangerous situation. So you're very careful where you place your feet. I remember one time when the boys and I were hiking up in East Tennessee, along the trail, we came upon a rattlesnake, and a couple people had already stepped over it without even realizing it was there. You can watch your feet. You can watch your feet get bit by a rattlesnake. So watching your feet physically is one thing. It's a good rule to follow. Watching your feet spiritually is even more important. And so I think what we would say here and make a spiritual application is watch your step. Watch your step. Be careful where your feet take you. So the first part of this expression, feet, is talking about our spiritual direction. And then the other part of this that we want to comment about is simply about mischief. And I believe the word mischief, and I think maybe, James, did your version say evil instead of mischief? Mischief, evil, sin, that's everywhere. And it takes no skill, no talent to find it. What are you considering? What's the thing that you're being tempted about? Maybe drugs or alcohol? I'm going to tell you, it's out there. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to go out there and find drugs and alcohol at your ease. You don't have to be smart or talented. Anybody can do that. You want to get into drugs and alcohol? Anybody can do that. There's no talent in that. You want to get involved in sexual immorality? It's everywhere. It's all over the place. Anybody can do that. I think sometimes people think that they're demonstrating some particular skill set when they engage in evil deeds. Like, there's no talent in that. Anybody can do that. And the fact of the matter is the majority of people are doing those sort of things. And so you have not achieved anything special if you've been able to discover mischief. Mischief, sin, evil is everywhere, and you can easily find it. In Genesis chapter 4, sort of a famous text that we remember well, Genesis 4 is where Cain and Abel were instructed concerning giving a sacrifice to God. And of course we remember Abel's sacrifice was pleasing to God and Cain's was not, and Cain got angry about that. And the Lord addressed Cain. He said in Genesis 4 verse 6, "Why art thou wroth, and why is thy countenance fallen? If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? If thou doest not well," notice, "sin lieth at the door." It's just right there. It doesn't take much to step off into sin. And God warned Cain about that, and we need to be warned as well. In another very familiar text to us in Matthew chapter 7, beginning verse 13, Jesus said, "Enter ye in at the strait gate, for," notice, "wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." Jesus is saying here exactly what we're trying to say. It is not difficult to engage in sin. If you want to live that sort of life, it's a broad way, and it's wide, and you have no trouble finding that pathway. You can go that way very easily. It is readily accessible. It's easy to go the way of sin. And so in this statement that God hates feet that be swift in running to mischief, he's talking about the person whose direction, spiritual direction in life, is toward doing evil. And notice, I think it's particularly also interesting that he talked about this person is swift in running to evil. This person is full blast in that direction. But it just seems to me that a thing really worth stressing is that this is not a difficult path to find or follow. The majority of the world's population is doing that. I want to particularly encourage our young people to think about that. You're not doing anything that hasn't been done before. If you want to engage in some of those sinful kind of conducts, you're not the first to ever have been there. You haven't discovered something new that nobody else ever knew. The majority of the world goes that way. It's easy. You can run quickly and get right to this mischief that is so abundant in the world. Be advised that that is not anything special at all. What we do know, and the Bible teaches it, and our own human experience bears it out, that if we choose to go that direction, it is a progressive thing. It goes from bad to worse. One thing leads to another. Just think about from our own human experience, maybe from your own recollections. Do you know anybody? Have you ever known anybody who was happy, long-term happy now? I'm not just talking about momentary gratification of sin, just the momentary pleasure of sin. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is, have you ever known anybody who was long-term happy by engaging in sinful activity? So they gave themselves over to mischief, evil, and wickedness, to sin. They lived their life that way. How'd that turn out for them anyway? I think our own human experience says those kind of people have not lived a happy, fulfilled, and satisfying life. On the other hand, think of some people that you've known. Maybe some people that have passed now, but they lived a long, full, and happy life. They were married to the wife of their youth. They raised a successful and spiritually prosperous family, and their lives were really happy. How did they do that? Well, because they didn't go the way of sin, right? And they followed the path described in the Bible. And so we see from our own human experience that following the pathway of sin does not bring long-term happiness or satisfaction. Our own experience bears that out, and the Bible definitely confirms that and says so. In Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful." And I know you've seen this before, but notice this verse itself describes a progression, how it's easier and easier to go that way and stay in that path. It talks about the man who walks. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. So this verse is saying the man is blessed who doesn't do that. But what's implied is that's sort of the normal progression of sin in a person's life. He walks that way. Then he stops and he stands and he observes. And finally he just sits down and makes himself comfortable in that way of life. That's how sin goes. It goes from bad to worse. It's easy to get there. It's easy to start. And it is easier and easier to stay in that destructive life. If we go back to Genesis chapter 4 again, where we were talking about Cain. Remember, Cain was angry because his sacrifice had not been pleasing to God. And God warned him, sin lieth at the door. Well, what happened? You know what happened. In the verses that follow, Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. It was there, right? Sin was there. God warned him, sin is lying at the door. And Cain, of course, fell into that sin and murdered his brother. That's how sin progresses. And if we allow ourselves to go that way, it'll just get worse and worse. God hates feet that are swift in running to mischief. Probably in our mind, one of the classic cases of a fellow who went from bad to worse is the case of David and his sin with Bathsheba. And you all know it so well. We remember that David cast a lustful look in the direction of Bathsheba. He called for her. He engaged in sexual immorality with her. Then when his sin was going to be discovered, he attempted to deceive and then ultimately ended up guilty of murdering Bathsheba's husband, Uriah the Hittite, and taking Bathsheba for his wife. And he was confronted by Nathan the prophet. And Nathan the prophet spoke of this progression of sin in the case of David. In 2 Samuel 12, verse 9, "Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with a sword, and hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon." And so here Nathan boldly confronts David and says, look what you have done. And look how one thing has led to another and another and ultimately to murder. That's the progression of sin. And it happens in our lives too if we allow our feet to swiftly pursue that kind of lifestyle. We got to realize, as Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11, that there's a war going on. He said, "Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lust, which war against the soul." There's a war going on here, and we got to be aware of that. And we can't afford to be careless about where our feet go. Watch the direction which you are heading. Of course, we know that it's not too difficult to see that sin brings heartache and ruin into our lives and ultimately eternal damnation. God hates evil. He hates wickedness. He hates sin. And he hates those who are of the mindset to swiftly run after those kinds of things. Why does God hate that anyway? God hates feet that be swift in running to mischief. Why does he hate that? Well, I think it's pretty clear that God wants better for us than that. He wants us to have a happy and fulfilled life. He wants our lives to be blessed. He does not want us to suffer in this life or in eternity. The fact of the matter is that everything God instructs for us is because he wants better for us. He's not doing it to make it hard on us or difficult. He's not trying to just see how rough he can make it, see if he can find a chance to condemn us. No, God wants better for us. And so everything that he wants from us is actually for us. He wants us to serve him faithfully, and it's in our best interest to do so. In Proverbs chapter 13, verse 15, it says simply, the way of transgressors is hard. You decide to live that way. You decide to run after mischief. You're going to make your life hard, as we were saying earlier. And then, of course, as we point out, ultimately, eternal loss. Romans 6, beginning verse 19, I speak after the manner of men because of the infirmity of your flesh. For as ye have yielded your members servants to uncleanness, the end of those things is death. And Paul is speaking not there of physical death, but rather of spiritual death. And so, again, don't go that way. Watch where your feet lead you. Watch what direction you're going, because you're just going to bring heartache into your life, and you're going to ultimately be lost eternally. So, okay, God hates feet that be swift in running to mischief. Can you think of a Bible example of someone who might stand out as a worthy pattern for us to imitate? My guess is that a lot of you are thinking about maybe the same one I'm thinking about. Consider the example of Joseph. You know the story of Joseph. You remember that he was the favorite son of his father Jacob, and unfortunately Jacob had overtly demonstrated that favoritism, and his brothers hated him and were jealous of him. He had also had some visions that made his brothers even more angry toward him. The visions suggested maybe that ultimately they would bow down and serve him. And he was just despised by his brothers on multiple counts. And so one day out in the field, when they had the opportunity, they caught him. Were going to kill him, but decided instead to sell him. He ended up in Egypt and was a slave in Egypt. Sold as a slave in Egypt. He ended up in the house of a high-ranking officer named Potiphar in Egypt. But Joseph was just a great young man and obviously was very loyal and devoted, and even to his slave master. He was loyal and devoted, and Potiphar turned everything over to him. Basically didn't worry about anything in his whole house. He let Joseph take care of everything. Let Joseph take care of everything, and Joseph was doing a great job. But a problem arose because Potiphar's wife had desires toward him, sexual desires toward him. And of course, she tried to seduce him, and he consistently resisted. In Genesis 39, beginning verse 7, it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me, but he refused. Notice that he did not just refuse once. This was not just a one-time temptation. It was not the case that she made such a suggestion once and he said absolutely not, and that was the end of it. No, it says it came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he hearkened not to her to lie by her or to be with her. And so this temptation was a consistent one. She was constantly trying to engage Joseph in this way, and he resisted. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. He literally ran away from that moment of temptation. You know how the story goes on. And now she's angry, and so she has his coat in her hand. And when Potiphar comes home, she falsely accuses Joseph of forcing her. And Potiphar, that's all Potiphar needs to hear, and he throws Joseph right into prison, where he languishes for a long time unjustly. But the point of it is, Joseph was so determined to do right. Where did his feet take him? What did his feet do? God hates feet that are swift in running to mischief, but you got to believe that God loved Joseph, whose feet ran away from evil. When it became such, he'd been resisting this temptation right along, but when the temptation became so strong that the only option was to literally, with his feet, run away from the temptress, he exactly did that. And so God hates feet that be swift in running to mischief. You've got to believe that God loves a person like Joseph, who will do whatever it takes to stay away from temptation and sin. I want to suggest to you that we, like him, should have feet that flee from evil. Rather than swiftly running toward mischief, evil, and sin, our feet should flee from evil. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22, Paul told Timothy, "Flee also youthful lust, but follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart." Flee youthful lust. Run away. Use your feet. Get out of there. I don't know what words the young people use anymore to taunt someone when they're hesitant to do something. I remember the word we used when I was a kid. I don't think they still use that word, but the word when I was a kid is, if you wouldn't do something, you were a chicken. You were a chicken. What's the matter? You a chicken? You a chicken? Come on. Why won't you do this? Are you a chicken? And kids would taunt other kids with that word. You're just being a chicken. You're a chicken. Basically, they're saying you're afraid. You lack courage. You're afraid of what would happen. I want to tell you, and I especially say to our young people, you are no chicken. You are not showing lack of courage. Rather, you're showing an abundance of courage when you flee away from sin. It takes courage to do that. I want to tell you, the weak person just succumbs to those kind of peer pressures and temptations. The weak person gives in and does what he's being tempted to do. It takes a courageous person to say, "No, I will not. And if it comes down to it, I'm going to get on my feet and run out of here and get away from this temptation." It's what Joseph did. And you know that God loved Joseph for doing that, and he'll love you for doing that as well. Like Joseph, let's use our feet to flee from evil rather than run toward it. God hates feet that are swift in running to mischief. 7 things God hates. You're beginning to memorize that passage. It's not difficult, is it? Proverbs 6, 16 through 19. Keep reading it. Maybe post it on the refrigerator. And we got a couple more things to discuss in our series. A false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. Lord willing, we'll continue that. Lord willing, we'll continue that in our next lesson. Thank you very much for your good attention. We're going to sing a song of invitation. We always do that when we're assembled together. When we conclude our lessons, we always want to provide an opportunity. There might be someone with us tonight who has a desire to make your life right with God. The most important decision you could possibly ever contemplate, being right with God. The initial plan of salvation is easy to understand. Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. If we can assist in your obedience tonight, let us know. If you more, if you need the prayers of your Christian already, but you need the prayers of the saints. If we can help you, let us know while we stand and sing this song.